all professional work involves service. If you're working professionally, and this is true for at home or in the office, all real work is about service. In some way, that's the essence of professionalism, is providing the greatest service to others. So the desire to really serve others is enough to anchor your attention in the work that you're doing.
Before we get started, if you enjoy these episodes, you might want to explore more at optimalwork.com. Our website offers unique content, tools, and exercises to help you thrive at work and beyond. We have an in-depth masterclass which covers our entire theory of growth. We have daily recommendations for personalized advice, and we have a platform to help groups and organizations learn and practice optimal work together. You can get a free trial at optimalwork.com. Now let's get started with today's episode. Hey, this is Sharif here with another episode of the Optimal Work Podcast, joined by Dr. Kevin Majors. Kevin, good to be back here with you again.
Hey, Sharif, great to be back.
Yeah, Kevin, I'm glad you were able to make time in your schedule for another episode,
Always.
another recording.
Exactly.
It's great. It's great. Well, Kevin, we're here now on to episode number 4 of our series on humility, professional humility. And so we did, the first overview episode, and then we covered defensiveness, and then criticism or critical spirit. And so now we're on to stage 3, which is stonewalling.
Yeah, that's right. It's really a culmination of the other two, right? Defensiveness and criticism.
Yeah. Maybe we could just start with, I think it's kind of an intuitive thing of like stonewalling, obstructing, not letting people in, building a barrier between yourself and other people. I don't know if there's anything more to add in terms of a technical description. And this all comes from the work of, this sequence comes from the work of John Gottman in like marriage counseling, I suppose, right?
Exactly. So his book, Why Marriages Succeed or Fail, which I've said before, could be why businesses succeed or fail. It applies everywhere. And what I love about talking about humility in a professional context is if you can really see the depth, the beauty of humility in that setting, you can see how work is actually the hinge on which all character formation really does turn. So that if we can use our work to really go deep into living humility, then work can help us with any ideal. Because humility really is the path of growth. So, and, defensiveness, means to overcome that, we have to be willing to take responsibility of where we have erred. Well, that allows us to admit that we can grow. So it's such a crucial first step. And then criticism, well, that's the tendency we have when we want to just hyper-focus on the negative in others. But also we can flip that around and be grateful and appreciate the good that others have. And that makes us able to learn from them. Well, that just furthers us on the path of growth. So we don't know everything and we can learn from others. So you can see humility is really profoundly pro-growth. But I think that even more you can see when it gets to this next level, which is the issues surrounding stonewalling, and what it does to our attention. And I think you can see that, here, that the person who stonewalls is really cutting off the other that they're in a bond with. It could be a leader stonewalling certain members of the team because he's deemed them to be threats or, it's his position, or it could be in any setting that there's this total kind of blocking out of someone. In relationships, it happens that people can feel so defensive and so critical of the other that they think the only solution is to take flight into self-absorption, to somehow cut the other person emotionally off. But in both cases, it's kind of a paranoid style of thinking. It takes the defensiveness as being totally necessary and the criticism as being totally justified. There's no curiosity about how they could grow. And so the only thing then, that the conclusion of paranoia is stonewalling.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned that this is kind of the natural consequence of defensiveness and criticism, that those two, if they're left unchecked, they'll naturally lead to this later stage of stonewalling. And then I suppose if if stonewalling is left unchecked, that leads to the final stage of outright contempt.
Exactly. That's right. And I think you can even see it kind of writ large, that there's this cultural belief we have that others are primarily the source of trauma. And so we have to always be like, if you tell people, the best thing you can do is to forget about yourself and to serve others, that could be seen as leading people into trauma. Now to me, that's exactly indicative of the paranoid state of mind, where others are primarily seen as threats so you have to defend against. And there's total hyperfocus on the negatives that happen in relationships. But we are not more safe by having fewer bonds. We are definitely less safe with fewer bonds. The more rich our relationships are, the more we have of them, the stronger they are, the safer we are. So paranoia on the surface can look like it is pro-safety, but it's not. And at the cultural level, then, if everyone is seen as potentially threatening, it kind of reminds me like why we don't let children roam around anymore. Because it's like the paranoid style of parenting took over, so that and this is now enforced by laws, so that you cannot let children under a certain age, go outside by themselves. Not to get into the prudence of that, because there are ways we could make things safer, I think, and we could, and we could make sure that it is safe. But to say that, it really was caused by this kind of panic that as if everyone is a potential threat to everyone else. And there's something atomizing about that. There's in a society, that then all you're left with are individuals engaging in self-care and self-protection and self-absorption. I know that's too maybe broad brush, but yeah.
Before we continue, a brief message. If you're benefiting from these discussions, please hit like and subscribe to our channel. Doing so helps us reach more people. So you're not just learning yourself, you're helping others discover a path to growth and flourishing too. Thanks so much for your support. Enjoy the rest of the episode. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and not to pile on too much and start attacking your profession and everything, but it seems like I hear a lot of in therapy that it's encouraged of the emphasis on how to build boundaries, or set boundaries with other people, or maybe there's a focus on blaming other people for some kind of causing you trauma, and encouraging, the therapist might encourage someone to set boundaries between this person or entirely cut them off. And maybe that's something that's talked about more now in this season where we're traveling and spending time with family members, extended family, and so forth.
No, it's true. It could be that this paranoid style has influenced everything. And I think we've always known in therapy that if you can get people to see others, particularly their parents, as threats, and to be angry and critical of their parents, that you've secured a patient for a very long time. Because it's kind of bottomless. And so fundamentally, are we looking at helping people to really build strong bonds in their family, in their places of work, in society at large? That needs to be the focus. And so I'm not saying that there's no real threats out there and that there aren't perpetrators. There certainly are. And there are dangerous people that you don't want to be in bonds with. And so I do think that, boundaries are totally appropriate. You wouldn't want to have a joint bank account with someone you just met a day ago. So there have to be these boundaries because you could be taken advantage of. But I also think that we need, maybe just to be more realistic in assessing, are people really so bad? Are the people around us? And I think in a polarized country, it's very easy to see the entire other half of the country, as somehow threatening and bad. And to me, it seems like that reflects the kind of paranoid style again. It's all defensiveness and criticism, leading to a kind of stonewalling against the other half. And so it's a very different approach to be seeing that maybe if we're really not so excessively defensive of our own self-image, and how we're being seen, and we're more able to really see the good in others and to appreciate that goodness, well, then we might actually desire to have stronger bonds with them. And that seems to me that a key kernel of mental health that doesn't necessarily get so much attention, but the desire to forget self and really form lasting bonds with other people. But that is the real mark of mental health. That we don't want to help our patients, as I'm speaking as a therapist, to be always focused on themselves. Even Freud wanted people to be able to work and to love. And both of those elements involve this kind of self-forgetfulness. So that you can let go of your issues, and maybe the excessive defensiveness and criticism, that paranoid state of mind, let go of all of that. And really be open to people as they are, so that you can appreciate the good in them and be able to serve them through your work and love them in bonds.
So, Kevin, we have talked a little bit about stonewalling at the individual level and, putting up a barrier to kind of keep a single person out, say. And I think that seems clearly related to, obviously, a lack of humility, that you're kind of a little bit more occupied with yourself and less occupied with forming a bond with another person. And then we talked a little bit about stonewalling writ large in society, of a little bit more of a culture of paranoia. So how does stonewalling writ large, how is that a manifestation of a lack of humility, like a kind of collective lack of humility or something? Because I see that more as oriented towards like maybe being overly zealous for safety or protectiveness or something, but less a lack of humility kind of at a larger cultural level.
Yeah, it may be that if humility really is truth, and if the stonewalling is built on paranoia, then it's really built on an excessive need to defend self at the expense of truth and reality, and the criticizing of others at the expense of truth and reality. So at least it's based on the same kind of deceptions that pride is based on inside of us. And it would seem to me that at the societal level, that if everyone else is a potential perpetrator and we are always the perpetual victim, well, that playing the victim is already part of defensiveness. Then there is a kind of lack of acceptance of reality that I think is the hallmark of the narcissistic person. They don't accept themselves and others as they are. They try to force themselves and others to be in some way that is more serving of self. And I think that even at the societal level, that is it like classical pride? No. But it certainly is a denigrating of others in judgment by seeing them so bad, and a defending of oneself in judgment. So to me, that has all the fingerprints of pride. And certainly leads to people being more isolated from each other. And this is one of the things about humility that is like a shift, because if we're talking about defensiveness and criticism, we're really centering the discussion on judgments, that we're blameless and that others are guilty. So that kind of emphasis on judging ourselves and others is the hallmark of the work of the intellect. But there's this deeper dimension, of humility, which is about attention itself. And I actually think that humility is primarily about attention and not about judgments. Now, insofar as the judgments are true, then they're in accord with humility. And insofar as they're self-servingly false, they're in the service of pride. But with that said, I think fundamentally humility is the forgetfulness of self and this preference to love and attend to others.
So you might have to, so it's not less about saying, oh, I'm not good and this person is good. That would be a judgment. But it's more about just attending, not thinking so much about yourself and attending to the other person.
Yeah. So it's accepting yourself as you are and accepting the other person as they are. So that's the basis of forming a real bond with each other. And the bond that we have should bring out the best in both of us. So it should help both of us to be growing. And that's the highest kind of bond. That's what a true friendship looks like. It's a bond of real love that truly brings out the best in each. But humility is what allows us to be open to that. So I think if you had two perfectly humble people, with this total forgetfulness of self and willingness to attend to the other, that if they were to meet each other, they would become fast friends because there would be nothing in them, that would tend towards self-absorption and isolation and this kind of making them unbondable. But humility is what fundamentally makes us bondable, because it allows us to really attend and bond to the other.
So, Kevin, I think this is great. So now what like practically do we do? I guess we've brought in the notion of attention and connecting that with humility and overcoming this inclination to stonewall others and put up barriers around ourselves. So that leads me to then think of, like default mode and mindfulness and, the salience of our thoughts and training ourselves in this way. So is that kind of the path forward you see in this regard?
Yeah. So I remember reading something that a very wise person once said, that voice that you hear in your head is the voice of your pride, more or less paraphrasing. And when I read that, I had read it before, but I read it again, and I had just been reading about the default mode network, which in fact is the source of the voice in our head. And I had just read that the default mode network is inherently self-referential. So in fact, the voice in our head that's talking is always talking about us, in some way, in the way things relate to us. And that was my first, real connecting the dots here. But then later I read things about humility being forgetfulness of self, and that it's not about thinking less of yourself, it's about thinking of yourself less. And it's really debated who actually said that, so at first. But so there is this idea here that the default mode network is the chatter in the head, and that is always self-referential. Well, it's actually a very interesting way then of experiencing the kind of signature of pride. If pride is self-absorption, then pride is being stuck in your own thoughts. And anything then that helps us to get grounded in reality and to silently engage the present moment. Silently engaging the present moment is, at the human level, the building block of humility. That's what humility really is like in practice, that there's just no self-reference at all. And the more we can hold ourselves there, in the present moment, in silence, which is what mindfulness does. So I actually see mindfulness as really integral to the experience of humility. So that there's a sense of the quieting of the default mode, the ceasing of self-absorbed thoughts, so that you can just be there in the present moment. And then it'll come back, and you gently recognize it, release it, and re-anchor in the present moment. So, and if you keep doing that, gradually your default mode network goes quiet. Well, that frees you then of all of that paranoid style of thinking. If you can't criticize others silently in your head, and you can't be engaged in kind of self-excusing ruminating, silently in your head. And that really then is the foundation for your ability to work well, which also can be done in silence, and then to form bonds with others. So the ability to work and to love is all through task attention.
Yeah. So, okay, Kevin, I have a quick question about task attention. This might be kind of an odd question, but a lot of people say with mindfulness, I think maybe some issues, okay, you're just focusing on your breath, but how is that building a bond with another person? Or you might think of someone, doing like a mindful hobby. Like I know people, people find drawing very meditative, or I met someone recently who finds, doing pottery very meditative. So it's like you're working with your hands, you're not thinking about things, or playing piano or whatever. So, but at the same time, you might be doing these things and they might be mindful. And so you're not thinking negatively about other people in your head or thinking positively about yourself, but you're just fully immersed in the activity. But at the same time, you might not be building a bond with other people. So what do we do when the mindful kind of activity is not oriented towards building a bond? Is it still, okay, or not the best, or how do you evaluate that? So I think
mindfulness per se is the most simple form of work. And work is, when you have this ordered and sustained attention that's not on self, but on something outside of self. So I think fundamentally work is humble, because it gets this out. And that fundamentally mindfulness as the simplest form of work is a simple form of humility. But is that saying the whole story? Well, I don't think so, because there needs to be, you could ask yourself, without the shaping of desires, could there actually be a real humility? And there's this connection between our attention and our desires, and that is expressed in the concept of salience. So salience is really the drawing power of something for our attention and our desires. So salience connects attention and desire, these things in us. And so if you are very hungry, so then you'd have a strong desire for food, right? So then any food-related stimuli would be highly salient to you. And so as you're walking through the mall, the smell of Cinnabon would be very salient to you, even though it's not real food.
As seed oils.
Exactly. Do people desire them even? And so, a mother really wants to take care of her baby. That desire is so strong that the crying of the baby, signaling the need, is highly salient. And so there could be, 10 babies in a room, but the mothers had no trouble. This has actually been studied, identifying which one is their baby, if it's their baby crying. Bats take that to another level. I've learned that a mother bat can actually distinguish her pups in a cave with a million other young pups. So,
wow.
So there's this incredible ability to distinguish, the cries.
Penguins can do it too. Yeah,
I imagine
in March
exactly.
Of the Penguins, there's a huge pack.
Yeah, but this is even true for the more hungry a person is for truth, the more wisdom becomes salient. Because people are hunger for meaning, or for something more. And then they're more able to detect it when it comes. So salience is this connection between desire and attention. So pride then can be seen as the salience of the self for attention, when the self is overly salient. So one is constantly then thinking about oneself, and one becomes self-absorbed. But how do you really anchor that in another? I don't think mindfulness actually by itself gives you something to anchor your salience. What is the real thing? Like, now, if you're doing it to grow in humility, well, then love for humility would be the anchor, because the mindfulness would now be serving something. All professional work involves service. If you're working professionally, and this is true for at home or in the office, all real work is about service. In some way, that's the essence of professionalism, is providing the greatest service to others. So the desire to really serve others is enough to anchor your attention in the work that you're doing. And similarly, then the more you love others, the more salient they become. And so the easier an anchor they are. So if you're with someone you really love, then it's easy to pay attention to them. And not only that, but paying attention to them deliberately shapes the salience and builds the love for them. And that's how you build the bond. The bond really is a kind of deliberate attention that you're paying to the other until that attention becomes habitual. And that's the bond, this habitual channel of attention that's mutual. So there are these deep links here. I think that you need an anchor that is why they're salient. But I think that service and love are these kinds of anchors. And if you can link what you're attending to service and love, now it's highly salient.
Well, okay, Kevin, that's a wonderful vision. I have one last question for you, which is that, although that would have been a good note to end on. So at the risk, so when we talk about stonewalling, it seems to me that we're talking about avoiding someone, essentially, more or less.
Yeah.
And, at the heart of optimal work's theory is this distinction between challenge engagement and challenge avoidance.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's like you get to bedrock ideas. That's central. So, but we haven't really talked about stonewalling in terms of avoiding a challenge or avoiding a person. I know it's not the best to see a person as another challenge for us. But I wonder is there a connection there of stonewalling and avoidance that's worth
absolutely.
worth discussing.
This is where the other is really seen. You could say that the bond here is the challenge, and the other is seen as the threat in some way. So when the other has become a threat to us, and maybe the other person is, maybe there's a real vicious cycle at work, but the key here is stonewalling does not build bonds. So it can't stop any vicious cycle that has started to form in a relationship. That if we can really make the judgment that the other person is trustworthy, then that means letting go of the stonewalling and trying to more sincerely desire to strengthen the bond with them. So that allows us then to open ourselves up to the feelings that will make us feel vulnerable. So I think that not only are people avoiding the bond and the other, but they're avoiding also the feelings in themselves that get triggered. So the shame is probably the most painful feeling that we have. So that's why it's this idea that all these ideas are are all together. The more willing we are to feel these things, the more we can actually settle ourselves into reality and pay attention to the other. And that's actually what can allow bonds to start to heal, right? And the more we're focused on really building the bond and serving the other person, trying to serve their true good, the more we can do and disappear in our own minds. But that's true even in the happiest and healthiest bonds. Every bond involves in some way doing and disappearing. That you are finding ways to please the other, and not even thinking of it as anything. You're finding ways of serving. And then you are becoming more and more invisible to yourself. Well, if you can practice that when bonds are challenging, you can certainly practice it in the 9 times out of 10 when bonds are not challenging. So I think that's what I want people to see, that humility is really the basis of a sincere desire to serve others and to have these deep bonds with them. And I think if we do it, if we're really thinking of the people that we're with, not seeing them just as challenges, but or as negative ones, as threats, but seeing the opportunity that we have continually to be building the bond, we can get through an hour of work without ever really having thought about ourselves. But we could have just been thinking about how do we do the best work here to serve others and to build bonds with them. And then you could do it in another hour of work, another hour of work. And all through the day, we can go just sincerely trying to give our best to others, forgetting about ourselves. And I think we could get to the end of the day and look back and say, I didn't even really think about myself once today. I think we'd look back and say that was the happiest day of our lives.
Well, Kevin, I'm glad I asked that last question because that's a great note for us to end on here today.
All right, Sri. There's always more to be said, but until next time.
All right. Thanks so much, Kevin. All right. We'll be back next week. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode. If you enjoyed our conversation and you're looking for more in-depth guidance, check out optimalwork.com, our platform of content, tools, and exercises that will help you thrive at work and beyond. See you next week.